Welcome back to my channel, and since it's been a while since I've talked about Yae, and it is her banner right now, I want to make an updated guide video for 3.7 covering her skills, builds, themes, constellations, and maybe some gameplay tips. Initially, I pulled for Yae because I needed A's wife, but then she was really underwhelming for a lot of people. The ones who had Raiden would rather use fischl or Sarah at the time, especially if you had C6 Sarah. Her bonus damage based off of EM didn't make that much sense, since you'd probably want to play mono electro teams, and there were just better options. She was also called a weaker fischl, and while that may be true in some cases, fischl doesn't have the nuke that Yae can provide, and also having a 5-star version of a really good 4-star, like fischl, is nice to have. I mean, look at Kazuha and Yelan, they are both 5-star versions of broken 4-stars, being Sucrose and Xingqiu, and they are considered to be like the best units in the game. Now, I'm not saying that she's on the same power level as those characters, but fast forward to Dendro, and with the birth of the Quicken reaction, she rose to power as one of the better drivers in Aggravate teams, along with Sinnoh and Keqing. Her EM scaling now made much more sense thanks to Aggravate, and as an Electro Catalyst user, she is a great fischl driver. Anyway, starting off with talents, normal attack is nothing special except for the cool animation. I still wish she had better multipliers, and if you were playing Genshin back then, a lot of us dreamt of her being a normal attack carry. Her elemental skill is her main source of consistent damage, and this comes with 3 charges. The totems have a level mechanic, and this level is based off of how many other totems are linked to it. There's also a visual on these totems, no rings meaning level 1, 1 ring meaning level 2, and 2 rings meaning level 3. You will want to try and link all 3 to each other in most cases in order to maximize your damage output. Casting 3 E's usually does the job if you don't move too far, or if you don't get knocked back by consecrated beasts. Her elemental burst is one of the only 90 cost bursts in the game, which hits for 1 to 4 times depending on how many totems you have at the time of casting. No totems is 1 hit, 1 totem is 2 hits, and so on. This burst also destroys all of the totems on field, but her A1 passive does give you 3 charges back as soon as you burst, allowing you to recast her skills after bursting. This is what we call her EEEQ EEE rotation. Her A4 passive gives the totems extra damage based off of her EM. Think of this as a bonus where EM rolls aren't that bad, but when used in dendro teams, you can actually build for this passive in order to deal increased aggravate damage, and as well as not lose too much for not building attack. And for your talent priority, skill is your number 1 priority followed by her burst, and then after that you can choose to level up the normals if you're planning to on-field her, but really this isn't essential. Before we talk about artifacts, I want to talk about her energy requirements. So you can run Yae with little to 0 ER if you wanted to just hard focus her skill damage. This is okay in most cases, but the animation is cool and the burst is a big nuke. This has a really nice multiplier actually. So I suggest running anywhere between 130 to even 160 ER depending on your teammates and if you have Favonius weapons on the team. Personally, I run her with around 150 ER while fischl is on the team, and this allows me to burst every rotation. Running characters like Raiden, fischl, and weapons like Syphus or Favonius will affect your personal ER requirement, so honestly just test and get a feel for your ER, or use an energy calculator which I can provide in the description. As for the artifact sets, as a general build, you want standard DPS with attack, electro, and crit. You can opt for EM or even ER on the sands depending on your teams and your artifact sets. EM can be good on dendro teams, and ER can help with your ER requirement if you want to burst with her every rotation. Full EM for Hyperbloom is not recommended as she will not be proccing most of the seeds, and I feel like investing into her skill and burst damage is more worth it. For the artifact sets, she is really flexible and doesn't really need a 4-piece set. A lot of the 2-piece artifacts benefit her like the Gladiators, Shimenawa, or any of the attack sets. The 2-piece Thundering Fury is also good, and any of the EM 2-pieces are also pretty viable. Just feel free to use any combination of these artifacts like Wonders with Flower of Paradise, Wonders, Gladiators, Thundering Fury, Gilded Dreams, you get it. Feel free to use any combination of these artifacts since you can just strongbox them all at this point. Emblem is also viable, and since you probably spent the last 2 years in that domain, then you probably have pieces from that set. 4-piece Gilded Dreams is great on dendro teams and what I personally use, but the damage difference from the 2-piece of any EM sets is minimal. Honestly, just use the sets that you have either the best substats on, the artifacts that allow you to hit your ER requirement, and the sets that let you hit the EM threshold in dendro teams, 200 to 300 EM being like the sweet spot for aggravate, and obviously try to get a good crit ratio. For her weapons, Kagura's will be your best in slot, and the current weapon banner isn't bad if you're only looking at the 5 stars, but there are other viable options like the Skyward Atlas if you have it, the Lost Prayer, and the Memory of Dust. All of us standard banner losers and people who've who've been looking for users of these weapons can finally put them on Yae, and she'll actually benefit from them. Most of the 5-star options are really viable and are just good statistics for her, even the attack percent ones. For 4-star options, Widsith, even with the downtime on the passive, is great because she can take advantage of every single one of the passives. Elemental damage is great, attack is really good, and EM is also nice on dendro teams. If you have this weapon with high refinement, so like at R3 or above, it can be competitive with the 5-star options, and it helps you front load most of your damage. Solar Pearl is also good, but I wouldn't buy the battle pass just for this weapon, as other weapons like the Widsith are good enough. And for completely free to play options, Oathsworn Eye is a great option if you have it. Black Cliff is good and can be bought from the Starglitter shop, and the Mappa Mare is good on dendro teams. It's craftable, and you can make a case for Hakushin Ring as it can buff your other Electro teammates like fischl or Raiden if you're using them with Yae on the team. As a 5-star fischl, Yae can be used in almost any team really. She shines in dendro but is not limited to the aggravate reaction. For example, she can be swapped in for Beidou in taser teams like Fireworks, which uses a Hydro character like Child, Ayato, or Kokomi as the main on-fielder, and Yae and fischl as the off-field Electro characters. She can be used as an Electro unit in soup teams paired with Anemo, Pyro, and other elements. You can run her as an on-field driver in National, allowing overvapes for Zhang Ling, and of course in dendro teams where she can act either as an off-fielder to keep the quicken uptime for on-field carries like Alhaitam and Tignari, or as an on-fielder paired with fischl and an off-field dendro unit like Nahida, Baiju, or Kirara with Constellations as a fischl driver. Overall, a very flexible unit, strong synergy with fischl, and as I've mentioned before, a decent on-fielder for her Electro normal attacks. Lastly, let's talk about her Constellations because this isn't her first banner, so you might be watching this and thinking about pulling for her consts, especially because Kirara is on the banner. C1 is a decent constellation. It lowers her energy requirements by a decent amount, especially because she has a 90 cost and you can probably burst on every rotation without really thinking about the ER. C2 is a big one. The attack range of her totems is increased, and this is a huge increase. It's really noticeable, and as well as increasing the level of her totems by 1. So now max stack totems can now go up to level 4. This is a solid stopping point for most people planning to pull for her constellations. C3 is an increase in turret damage, and as we mentioned before, totems are her main source of damage, so this is pretty good. C4 is great, and this can increase your overall steam damage depending on your teammates. Raiden and fischl are the biggest winners when it comes to this constellation, and C6 is Raiden's C2. This constellation ignores 60% of the opponent's def, which is huge. Keep in mind this only applies to her turrets, but there aren't a lot of def shred sources in the game, and this will just omega buff your Yae. Overall, her constellations are pretty good, pretty balanced actually. C1 and C2 are nice, and after that really C6 is your next big spike in damage. If you've made it this far, you're now a Yae knower. If you like this type of content, feel free to sub, and if you are a Twitch degen, then check me out on twitch.tv/Smithy. I'll leave you guys with the showcase, and I'll see you next time.